The line at security had been long and slow. The usual hustle and bustle of travelers rushing to catch flights had only added to the tension in the air as the woman stood near the checkpoint. She checked her watch nervously. She was already late for her flight, but there was something deeper troubling her. It wasn't the flight itself that made her uneasy, but the strange sense of being watched, a feeling she couldn't shake. All morning she moved forward with the crowd trying to keep her head down, blending in with the others, each step a mixture of anticipation and a little fear. She had traveled this route countless times before, but today was different. There was an unfamiliar weight in the air. The woman was no stranger to security checks, her ID and boarding pass ready for inspection. She went through the usual motions, taking off her shoes and belt and placing her belongings on the conveyor belt to be scanned. As she waited, her mind drifted to the knife tucked in her bag. It was small, sharp, and had been a gift from an old mentor, a token of their time together. The words engraved on the blade were a secret only she knew, a personal reminder of a bond forged in fire and trust. When the woman reached the metal detector, the agent gave her a cursory glance, his eyes following her movements as she passed through the detector. Everything seemed fine until the alarm suddenly rang out. It was sharp and jarring, cutting through the hum of voices in the crowded terminal. She froze, the sound of the alarm echoing in her ears. The agent's face hardened, and without a word, he motioned for her to step aside. There was a quiet murmur as the people around her shifted uncomfortably. The crowd, still oblivious to the reason, continued on their way, but the woman stood there frozen in place. A second agent approached the woman, this one more serious, his eyes scanning her as he asked her to open her bag. The woman's stomach dropped as she complied. She knew exactly what they were looking for. The knife was the cause of the alarm. It always set off the detector because of its metal contents, but she had forgotten to remove it before going through security. This time she had been too distracted. The agent retrieved the small black bag from the conveyor belt and carefully unzipped it. He then pulled out the knife, holding it up for inspection. The woman's heart raced as the agent turned it over in his hands and examined the blade. The first agent stepped forward and began to ask her questions, his tone cold as he looked at her with suspicion. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his gaze never leaving her face. The woman took a deep breath, her mind racing, trying to stay calm as she answered, "It's a personal item. It was a gift from a mentor." The agent raised an eyebrow, his eyes now narrowing. "A mentor who?" he asked with skepticism. The woman knew she couldn't tell him everything. The truth was far too complicated. Too much of her past was shrouded in secrecy, and she had worked too hard to escape it, so she kept her answer simple. "Someone who taught me valuable lessons," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The agent didn't seem satisfied with her response, but his attention shifted back to the knife. He ran his fingers over the engraving on the blade as if looking for something hidden. Then his eyes widened and he stepped back. He looked from the knife to the woman with a strange expression on his face. Something had caught his attention. He glanced quickly at his colleague and then back at the inscription on the knife. It was a phrase in a language few would recognize. The words were simple, but they carried deep meaning, words that were meant for only one person to understand. The agent opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the room seemed to fall into silence. Air grew thick, people with tension, as the second agent stepped closer, his eyes now fixed on the inscription on the blade. He didn't need to ask more questions. His reaction was enough. It was clear to him that something about this knife was different. There was a recognition there, a moment of realization that sent a ripple through the room. The woman felt the shift in energy. It was like a switch had been flipped. The agent stood frozen, holding the knife in midair as if he had seen a ghost, and the hum of the airport seemed to vanish into the background for a few moments. Everything in the terminal felt suspended, as if the world was holding its breath. Silence was deafening, and the woman's thoughts raced as she tried to understand what was happening. She hadn't expected this reaction. She had always carried the knife with her, but never had it drawn this kind of attention. Not once in all her travels had she felt this kind of scrutiny. She had chosen this particular airport because it was usually quiet and easy to get through security. Now she regretted it. She wished she had been more cautious, but it was too late to go back. And of the other agents approached the scene and began to ask the first two agents what was going on. They exchanged a few quiet words, and soon the conversation turned to her The woman's heart sank. She knew she was about to be questioned more thoroughly, but what would they ask her? How would she explain the inscription on the knife? How could she ever explain the truth about the man who had given it to her, the man who had trained her in ways she could never talk about in a public setting? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Woman's mind raced as she considered her options. She could try to talk her way out of it, but she knew that wouldn't work. They would ask questions she couldn't answer without revealing far too much. She could also try to leave, but she could feel the eyes of the agents upon her like hawks waiting for the slightest movement. It was clear they wouldn't let her go without a deeper explanation. She had never expected to be caught in a situation like this, not in front of so many eyes, not with the tattoo on her back, not with her past following her like a shadow. Sound of footsteps approached, and the woman felt her heart skip a beat. She turned to see a man in uniform moving through the crowd. The moment he stepped forward, the agents snapped to attention. The man was tall with a presence that commanded respect. His uniform immaculate, his expression unreadable. The woman's breath caught in her throat as the man looked directly at her. He paused for a moment and then, without a word, motioned for the agents to step aside. The air around them shifted and the room fell even quieter. It was as if this man had the power to command silence with a mere gesture. The woman's mind raced. Who was this man? Why was he intervening? But as he drew closer, his eyes softened as they met hers, and for the briefest moment she saw a flicker of something familiar, recognition, something that hinted at a connection that went beyond the present. It was then that the agents seemed to realize who he was and that the situation had just shifted entirely. Lithe man in uniform stepped forward, his presence commanding the room in a way that made even the most seasoned agents stand at attention, his eyes never leaving the woman, his footsteps deliberate and measured. The agents who had been questioning her stepped aside as if sensing the shift in authority. They were no longer in control of the situation, and neither was she. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, the world around them narrowing to just the woman, the man in uniform, and the small black knife that had caused all the chaos. Woman's heart raced, her throat dry as she tried to stay calm. She had seen this man before. She couldn't place where or when, but something about him stirred a memory, something buried deep within her that she couldn't quite grasp. His eyes were sharp and calculating, yet there was a familiarity to them that unsettled her. It wasn't just that he was an authority figure or that he was important, it was something more personal, something from her past that she was not ready to confront. Stopped in front of her, his gaze intense but not unkind. His fingers brushed over the inscription on the knife for a brief moment, as if he were reading it or perhaps reliving something from his own life. The woman didn't know what to say or do. She felt exposed, vulnerable, standing there with her secret in plain sight. The inscription was more than just a few words. It was a key, a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had become, and everything she had been forced to leave behind. The man's voice broke the silence, his tone low and measured as he spoke. "I think we've had enough of this, don't you?" he said, his words directed at the agents who had been questioning her. They stiffened, but didn't respond. They knew who this man was, and they knew better than to challenge him. "It's all right," he added, glancing at the woman for a moment as if trying to reassure her. "Put it down," he commanded, and one of the agents hesitated before gently lowering the knife back onto the table. Tension in the room hadn't dissipated, but the energy had shifted. The woman felt a strange mix of relief and fear. The relief came from knowing she wasn't being arrested or detained. The fear came from not knowing why this man had intervened or what he wanted from her. The air was thick, people with questions, none of which she had answers for. The man looked back at her, his expression softening slightly. "You know," he began, his voice steady but with a hint of something deeper, "you've made quite an impression on the wrong people today." His words hung in the air like a challenge or perhaps a warning. The woman swallowed hard, her mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Why was he here? Why did he care about the inscription on her knife? The agent who had initially been in charge stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation, but the man in uniform raised a hand, signaling him to stop. "I said, we're done here," he repeated, his eyes cold, but the rest of him calm and composed. The agent hesitated and then backed away. The man's gaze never wavered as he sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled together as if he were carefully considering each word before speaking. His presence was commanding yet strangely calming. The woman stood before him, her back stiff. As her mind raced trying to process everything that had just happened, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of his words still lingering in the air. She had spent years burying the past, trying to outrun it, and now here it was catching up with her. She couldn't escape it anymore, no matter how hard she tried. The man finally broke the silence, his voice low and steady. "You've been running for a long time," he said, his words cutting through the tension in the room. "And I can't say I blame you, but running won't protect you anymore." The woman didn't respond, her jaw clenched as she fought the urge to snap back at him. She had heard it all before, the warnings, the threats, the promises that everything would come to light eventually, but what could he possibly know about her life? What could he know about the things she had done, the people she had lost? Leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You think you're the only one with secrets?" he asked, his tone sharper now. "You think you're the only one who's had to hide the truth from the world?" The woman swallowed hard, his words hit too close to home. The truth was she had never been able to share her real story, not with anyone. Not even the people closest to her. Every time she got close to revealing it, something inside her held her back. The fear of what it would mean, the fear of losing everything she had fought for. The man watched her silently, as if waiting for her to speak, but she remained silent, her mind in turmoil. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this up, how much longer she could maintain the facade, the lie she had been living. He had already seen through it anyway, and the thought of facing it head-on was terrifying. She couldn't afford to be weak, not now, not with everything at stake. Finally, the man sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You're not going to get out of this," he said softly, his voice almost sympathetic. "There are people looking for you. They've been looking for a long time." The woman's stomach dropped at his words. The knot in her chest tightened as she realized what he was implying. The people from her past, the ones she had tried so hard to escape. They were still hunting her, still searching for a way to pull her back into the world she had fought so hard to leave. He stood up then, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. He was taller than she remembered, and there was something in his eyes that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She couldn't look away, not now, not when she could feel the weight of everything hanging in the air between them. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm offering you a way out, a chance to make things right before it's too late." She shook her head, the words barely forming in her throat. She couldn't accept his offer. She couldn't trust him, not after everything, not after what she had been through. "You don't have to face this alone," he continued, his voice softer now. "You don't have to keep running. We have resources, people who can help you, and we're willing to protect you, but you have to make a choice." The woman stared at him, her mind reeling. She had spent so long running from the truth, so long hiding from the people who wanted to drag her back into that life, and now here he was offering her an escape. But at what cost? What was he really asking of her? What did he want in return? Silence stretched on as she weighed his words. She couldn't deny the fear that gripped her chest at the thought of returning to that world, the world she had left behind, the world of secrets and danger, the world where every decision she made could be her last. But she also knew that she couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later they would find her, they would drag her back, whether she was ready or not, and that thought terrified her more than anything. The man seemed to sense her hesitation and stepped closer, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I know it's hard," he said gently. "I know you've been through things that most people couldn't imagine, but you don't have to carry this burden alone." She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words press down on her like a heavy stone. The decision was looming, and it felt like the entire room was closing in on her. She could hear the faint hum of the airport outside the walls, the sound of people passing by, unaware of the decision she was facing. "You can keep hiding," he said, his voice quiet now, "but it won't change anything. They'll find you eventually, and when they do, it'll be much worse than if you take control now." The woman's mind raced as she considered his words. Part of her wanted to accept his offer, to take the chance and face whatever was waiting for her, but another part of her wanted to run, to grab her things and disappear into the crowd, never looking Back she didn't know what to do. She had spent so long building walls around herself that now they seemed insurmountable. "What do you want from me?" she asked, finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he regarded her with a thoughtful look, as if considering his response carefully. "I want you to stop running," he said after a moment. "I want you to step out of the shadows and face the truth you've been hiding from for so long." She shook her head again, feeling the familiar sense of panic rise within her. She wasn't ready for that. She wasn't ready to face her past and everything that came with it. "I've took a step closer," his voice barely audible now. "I'm not asking you to do this alone," he said. "I'm here to help you, but only if you're willing to help yourself first." The woman stood there frozen, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to do, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. Her mind was spinning, but one thing was clear: she couldn't keep running forever. She had to make a choice, and whatever she chose would change everything. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked, finally, her voice steady, but the fear still there, lurking just beneath the surface. The man didn't flinch at her question. Instead, he looked at her with a quiet understanding. "If you refuse," he said slowly, "you'll be left to face the consequences alone." His words hung in the air like a final warning, and for a moment the room seemed to grow colder. The woman's pulse quickened as the weight of his statement sank in. She knew what he was implying. She knew what it would mean if she turned him down. The woman's mind was spinning. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath shallow as she tried to process what he had said, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always been good at running, at hiding, at keeping her distance from people and the world around her. It was how she had survived for so long. It was how she had kept herself safe. But now she was being asked to stop running, to turn around and face everything she had been running from for years. Could she really do that? Could she really step into the light after living in the shadows for so long? She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself breathe, letting the steady beat of her heart slow as she tried to clear her mind. The air in the room felt thick, people with tension, and for the first time in a long time, she felt exposed. It wasn't just the man standing in front of her. It was everything, the lies, the secrets, the history she had buried deep inside her. Everything was being brought to the surface in a way she couldn't control. The walls she had built around herself had started to crack, and she was terrified that if she didn't make a choice soon, they would come crumbling down. The man was still watching her, his eyes calm but sharp, as if waiting for her response. She could feel the weight of his gaze like a pressure against her skin. It was as if he could see straight through her, straight to the person she had been hiding from everyone for so long. She didn't know what to say, how to respond. She was stuck, trapped between the past and the present, between the life she had chosen and the life she had left behind. "You don't have to make a decision right now," he said, breaking the silence, his voice soft but insistent. "But you do have to understand what's at stake." His words settled around her like a fog. She could feel them sinking into her bones. She had known the risks before. She had known the dangers of being caught, the consequences of not being careful, but hearing them spoken aloud like this made everything seem so much more real, so much more immediate. "They won't stop looking for you," he continued. "They won't give up until they get what they want." The woman's throat tightened at his words. She had spent years in fear of being found, of being dragged back into that world, back into that nightmare, and now it seemed like that fear was finally catching up with her. She had always believed that she could stay hidden, that she could keep running, and it would be enough, but maybe it wasn't enough anymore. Maybe she was running out of time, and you know that, don't you? The man said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. He could see it in her face, the fear, the uncertainty, the realization that everything was changing. She had thought she was in control. She had thought she could handle it all on her own, but now she wasn't so sure. Now she was faced with the one thing she had been avoiding, the one thing she couldn't outrun anymore. The man stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming, the air between them thick with unspoken words. "This is your chance," he said, his voice almost gentle. "To stop running, to stop hiding." She could feel the weight of his gaze on her like a rope pulling her toward him. She could almost hear the echo of her past calling to her, the familiar voices, the familiar faces she had tried so hard to